My name is Alfonso d'Abruzzo. That's my real name. It's still my real name. I never changed it. I thought of changing it once to make record keeping easier. And when it came right down to it, I said, no, that's my name.
My Italianness is clearly, it's ingrained in my blood. I mean, I always felt that if you cut me just a little bit, olive oil would come out of my veins.
I used to look in the mirror and hate to look in the mirror. I was so ugly, I said to myself. But you know, I began looking in the mirror. You know who I saw? I saw my mother. But now I look with being pleased because I'm seeing my mom.
My father definitely encouraged me to dream every dream I ever had and never to be afraid and to be as smart as I possibly could be.
One thing that my father always used to say, it was almost like, you know, when parents tell you the stories and always use the same line, we would hold hands, and I was a little boy, we would look at the sunset, and my father would tell me, Nicolino, dall'altra parte dell'oceano, on the other side of the ocean, there's a place that's always full of fishes, where all the dreams come true. That's America.
This is the story of how we became Italian Americans. A proud tale of who we are and what values we live by. And most importantly, a reminder of those precious things we must hold on to forever.
Buongiorno. Brave, benvenuti. Oggi è? Sabato. State in piedi. Ti salutiamo. Ti calore. Ti salutiamo.
Being born into an Italian family is really only the first step of a glorious and colorful journey, one we must keep fresh through recollection.
I tell parents all the time now, tell the stories of your family to your children because it helps children to understand who they are, where they come from, and what they belong to.
When I was in Italy with Grandma, I had to make the bread. I was in charge to go to the farm and get the vegetable. I walk about 2 or 3 miles to go and get the vegetable. And brought it home. I cooked for my sister, my grandmother. And now it went by, 6 years went by, then I came to America.
Excuse me, why didn't you meet a fella out there in Italy for 16?
No, we were not allowed to fool around.
Oh.
No, we were brought up to stay put and not looking for a boyfriend because we knew we had to come to America.
Imagine the ship coming in. Imagine you're 15 years old. Imagine you're trying to find the man of your life, this wonderful man who's been through a war, who's bringing you to America, who wants you to marry him and have his children and start a new life. You have no money, you speak no English. All you have is the promise of a better life with someone you love. And it happened right here.
Although stories differ from family to family, one quality was always present. Our capacity for hard work was enormous.
I'm one generation away from banging clothes on rocks in Calabria. Let's face facts here. I think my mother was a great role model for the work ethic because she came over here when she was 13 years old and she went to work in a factory. Then she got married and had me, and she raised a child and kept working and was able to put up wallpaper, lay linoleum, make draperies. She was able to sew total bridal gowns. I mean, she made one of my aunts her bridal gown. It was beautiful.
My father worked 12 hours a day, sometimes 6 days a week and more. I'd bring home work and do it on the weekend. I mean, I could sew like a factory worker when I was 10 years old on the big machine. I could make piping within the bias material like that because he did it and I learned how to do it. I asked Santa Claus when I was 9 years old for a sewing machine.
I went to work when my kid was in kindergarten in a factory. 22 years putting zippers on. I don't want to see another zipper.
My father got up very early in the morning and went to work, and still, again, he would help out neighbors. My father was in the construction business, and he would help build people's patios and terraces, and you know, he just was always willing to lend a helping hand, and always did.
Italians did the brickwork on the house that we're in now. if you walk through this neighborhood, you'll see astonishing things. Bricks are laid in very intricate patterns. Right up the block, there's a circle of bricks, and as I walk by it every day, I think, I know they were Italian-American artisans. Why did he want to do a circle? That was hard. He did it for himself. He didn't have to. He did it because it was beautiful.
My father was a garbage man. I mean, what can I do? He wasn't a banker. He was a garbage man. I was very proud of him. I mean, he died when he was 82. He still had teeth in his mouth. He used to break wood. He'd say, watch this. He'd get some pine, and he'd go, and he would break wood.
Whatever work we were required to do, it offered us a chance to show our best selves to the people around us. We worked proudly, with generosity and dignity, and with a sense that the world could be ennobled by our labor.
My father once told me, and I did not understand it at the time, that you do not need to be a sculptor to be an artist. You can be an artist sweeping floors. I didn't quite understand. And as I do my work, I realize how intense I am about what I do. As I see that the work defines who I am and how it represents me, my family, my father, my wife, my mother, my brother. When people get a dish from Nixtelino, when they get a recipe from Nixtelino, that is the essence of Nixtelino.
Well, you always reach for excellence, whether it's cleaning pots and pans or being a salad boy or a short order cook or being a lawyer. You bring the same expectations of yourself to those particular endeavors. And excellence is a paramount aspect of what you expect of yourself, and you expect no less of others.
We never cease trying to be excellent, but in America, one crucial obstacle remained difficult to overcome.
I began to go to school here, and I learned language the way everyone does, by listening and hearing it. And I was getting A's in art and things like that, but I was failing English, history, and so on. It was long after that that I perfected myself in English, and that took a lot of doing.
I was quite fluent in Italian, said my prayers in Italian, and could converse in Italian, I suppose with a thick Sicilian accent, but nonetheless, I was literate in the language. And about when I was 7, my grandfather then issued an edict. And when the Patriarch issued the edict, that was it. There was no appeals to a higher court. He said, I want my grandchildren to be Americans, and I want them to speak English. And then he forbade the use of Italian whenever the grandchildren were around.
I was born in a little town right outside of the city of Perugia. I first came to this country when I was 9 years old, and I couldn't speak a word of English. I think the biggest disappointment that I ever had in my life was in my high school years when I graduated as valedictorian of my high school class. And the principal of the high school at that time stood in the back of the hall and listened to me speak and said, well, no, you can't deliver the valedictorian speech because you have a traditional Italian accent.
The idea for us as children was that you overcome whatever difficulties are dealt to you by persistent hard work, and you achieve. And that's the way we're wired.
Families, they created a position in life for themselves, and they wanted to make sure that their children would have the best. And the best was defined by education. And they sacrificed everything that they could to make sure that they would get a college education, and they would get a good job, and they would move to the next station in life so that their grandchildren could move on.
My grandfather said, I remember, he was very, he said, you have to learn to work with this, not this. You don't work with your back, you work with your head.
Mama and Papa had very high expectations for us.
My father, with 6 children and a very high achieving background himself, set a very, very tough standard that in some families would have, I guess, seemed oppressive. For us, I think it was an inspiration. If I came home with a 98, he'd say, who else got a 98? Did anybody else get better than a 98?
Figures of authority seemed to be everywhere, for better or for worse.
There's God at the top, and Jesus, and then your father, your mother, the parish priest, your brothers and sisters, your aunts and uncles, and no matter what you do in life, you have to answer to all of those characters. So from the time you grow up and you're a little kid, 9 years old, you don't know an answer on the math test, you think about looking over to the smartest kid in the class, to his paper, and you think, I'm going to answer to God, to Jesus, to the priest, to my father, my mother, and you decide not to do it out of sheer fear.
Going to church on Sunday, I was always taught that lesson of respect. You're in God's house and you're so blessed, and it's not too much to ask to take 1 hour out of every week to go to God's house and say thank you. But I must say, I remember while my grandmother would be speaking to my father in the living room, I would wander around my Italian grandmother's apartment, and I remember her bedroom was the most mysterious place in the world because it was always very, very dark, and there was an altar to the Blessed Mother, and there were flickering candles, and this was just very mysterious to me.
The other thing about the way we were raised with respect to faith was the saints were always with us in our household. So if something was lost, St. Anthony, you'd pray to St. Anthony. And you could also promise to make a contribution to the poor, and St. Anthony would help you. And if something was an impossible situation, of course, St. Jude. And the Blessed Mother was always there, and your guardian angel was always watching over you. And so I think for all of us, there was a sense of not being ever alone or abandoned or in big trouble all by yourself.
My father wanted me to be a professional man. He wanted me to be a doctor or a lawyer, just like a lot of, I was good in school. That's what he wanted me to be. Or I wanted to be a priest, and he was mortified at that. And of course, my aunt, and my grandmother, they were so happy, and I walked around for a few years praying.
I had a period there where I thought I would be a nun. Well, you receive communion, you put on this bridal outfit with the thing in the head and everything, and you sort of get into it.
On Easter Sunday, my mother would clean the threshold, and at noon, the church would ring the bells, and we would all kiss the threshold. Well, it doesn't it's silly. The point is that there was no mocking it. It wasn't said, hey, what is this BS, We just did it because my mother thought that's what you should do, was that we were paying respect to Jesus rising.
With the Italians, you can't escape it even when you try. we're all we all broke away and returned, or we can't. Someone says, you're always a Catholic no matter what you do. It's true.
Our religious training and respect for our parents kept even a tough guy's impulses in check.
In my house, I never, not that I was in fear of being hit, I never as much as said the word hell. Now you're talking about a New Yorker in the streets of New York who came up through the streets would never use the word hell in front of my mother. Now, she comes to Broadway. My mother's never been to a live stage show. My mother used to think that the stage was like a television show. You can talk to the actors, and they won't answer back because it was like watching television. She heard me cursing in a show called Knockout. I was devastated because I knew. I kept coming out of character. I'm saying this and that and this and that. And my mother, you'd hear her in the audience when the quiet moment came. Oh, my son doesn't talk like that. He doesn't say no. That he's not really like that. This is just acting.
Admission to some of the most dramatic performances was free. You just had to be a member of an Italian family.
I wanted to become an actor because Uncle Costantino, when he came to the house, his voice was so charming because he spoke like this with beautiful Italian American accent. He'd been on the stage, he was sang alla Scala, San Carlo di Napoli, and he was very expressive, and the voice was placed right here, and he was very much a big personality. And I was fascinated by this man. He had so many cute ways about him. He had something called, if someone would make a foolish remark, in Neapolitan, it loses in the English translation, but he would say, deve mettere in the libro dei face. I have to put you in the book of fools. He would write in an imaginary book.
It's very interesting. There's this kind of improvisational pleasure in dealing with anything that comes up. Anything that happens is an opportunity to play. Oh, you have a flat tire. Oh my God. Well, what can we do about this? There's something, it's a chance to play.
You want to know how many grandchildren I have?
No, really, I don't want to know.
You want to know how many kids I have?
I really do, yeah.
I have 8 kids. And I had 2 miscarriages every 10 pregnancies,
Oh.
right?
Because you didn't have no television then.
I didn't know my P's and Q's.
Yeah.
That's what the doctor told me one time. I said,
Mm.
how, you only had 1 kid, 2 kids, how come? Again, gee whiz, not again I would go when I
You
was
should have read
pregnant.
some books.
I-
Because, see, I only had 2.
Who had time to read books?
Large or small, but large more often than not, La Familia was the source from which all our riches flowed.
I really did grow up in the traditional, quote, Italian family sense, the familial embrace that was part of this very close-knit family unit. There must have been 20, 30, 40 cousins, a lot of laughter, a lot of loud talk, a lot of love.
I contribute that mostly to Mom. She brought us up to believe and respect people and forgive people. And all we knew at the time was church and baseball. And I think that had a lot to do with her encouraging us through our youth and right up to today. We get along, 6 brothers. I don't think we ever fight, unless we play cards.
Even when we didn't all get along, the family could still give us everything we really needed.
My father and mother would fight. I'd go down to see my grandmother. They would give me cannolis and pasta and tell me how beautiful and wonderful I was, and I liked it better down there. So I used to go down there all the time. In fact, they couldn't get rid of me. They used to say, "Joy, your mother's calling." And I'd say, "I don't hear anything."
When I was growing up, I had the greatest life that is humanly possible for a young boy to have. But in saying that, I also come from a family that was broken. My father left us very early. My mother was legally blind and she brought up 7 children. And I was nurtured by 5 women, actually, my mother and 4 sisters. So before I even went out into the world, you know, I thought, man, am I going to be a hit because all these women love me.
We had this special Italian way of stretching the family or reshaping and redefining it so that, in some ways, it covered the entire neighborhood.
Everybody helps. If I need a couple of loaves of bread, I run down to the bakery. He opens the bakery, brings me bread.
That's what's kept it together.
If the restaurant across the street comes to me, says, "Joseph, I need a bundle of tablecloths," I give it to him. Another restaurant, his ice machine went out. It's, "Joseph, can I have pails of ice?" Give me ice for 3 days.
Well, you know, Hillary Clinton wrote a book that's called It Takes a Village. So, but where are these villages she's discussing? It Takes a Tenement is the name of the book. In my building, every single person that you knew lived there. So you didn't have to go out too far to get all manner of personalities. I just miss, I guess, coming home at night and seeing the bookies and seeing the grocer, you know, and all the people hanging around the stoops, you know, and just knowing everybody.
Now, at any given night that you might have been out late, you came home. It could have been maybe 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. You might very well, on a corner of where you live, in the apartment house where you live, see about 5 elderly women playing cards under a lamplight. I mean, it was so safe and so special.
La Familia, in the narrow and broadest sense, made us who we were and who we would become. When we left home and started families of our own, we had one great advantage. We absolutely loved being Italian.
Life is too short to go through it without being an Italian.
Mare, ci va a suonare, ci si suona un mandolino, e come si suona un mandolino, e bling 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 a mandolino, zinga zinga violino, tippity tippity ta.
Could our families have nurtured us, given us the encouragement and confidence we needed if it were not for remarkably strong and resourceful women?
My grandmother brought her little village from Italy to Sheepshead Bay, Brooklyn, and replicated that with all the ladies in their black dresses and their hair pulled back in buns. She was a powerhouse. She had her family organized. She had her paesani organized, and it's a part of the neighborhood in many ways. And yet, She had my grandfather convinced that he was the boss.
The Italian family is a matriarchy, and the women rule. Even though the men think they're ruling, they're not. The women are making all of the decisions about what's going to happen in that family.
Always the respected matriarch, Mama also became an object of our tender devotion.
Mama, I miss the day when you were here to guide me. Mama, I miss the day when you were here beside me, locked in the glow of your arms, sent from the heavens above. There is only one place, lost in your tender embrace. Oh, Mama, until the day that we're together once more, I'll live with these memories until the day that we're together once more. Oh, Mama, Mama, once more.
My mother, she would put her great strength, because she was a big woman, into the piano. Her whole body would play. And these big orotund sounds would come out of that piano. And you would be moved and thrilled. She'd play a tarantella. The whole room would be dancing immediately.
My mother was one of the first Eucharistic ministers and would go and bring communion to the sick in the hospitals. And we watched her take care of us so well, but also be there to take care of others.
When I was a young boy, I used to have dreams, and you could interpret those as nightmares, that suddenly I was homeless and had nowhere to go. And I knew when my eyes opened, there was my mother, and if I was coughing that night, she had Vicks, and she was rubbing. The worst thing that can happen in my house was to invite someone over, okay? Now, if it was 3 o'clock in the morning and there were about 7 people sleeping in the house, my sisters, my brother Joey, me, and that person, if there was a cough, my mother would get up in the middle of the night with Vicks and rub everyone in the house.
In those days, a woman found her heroism in making the home a haven, a safe, clean, nurturing place. It was a point of pride for these women to do this.
Maternal pride revealed itself most often at the great dinner table, where some of the family's most interesting dramas were played out.
The dinner table, it was like a theater. At this theater, me and my brother would be, shelling the peas. My mom would be chopping the onions. My father would be peeling the garlic. There would be the olive oil sauteing in the pan. My grandma would be right next to us, taking care of the tomatoes. And as all this took place, everybody started to talk to each other. And it was in this atmosphere that I discovered the secrets of my grandmother, her youth, her dreams, her ambitions, what did come true, what didn't. And it was in that real that I discovered who I am, where I come from, and what is my family all about.
At dinner on a Sunday, the whole family would be there. I don't know how many people, uncles, cousins, all sitting around. There's a little apartment. The living room was filled with this table. There was no room in the living room other than the table and the chairs around it. I mean, you could get in from the kitchen and you had to hand things across the table. And the dinner would go on for about 6 hours, and it would end with cracked walnut shells laying all over the table. And in between there was this hilarity and loud talking.
There was like about 7 courses, but the main course, the main ingredient was the conversation, and there'd always be, in my youth anyway, friends that would come and eat with us, so there'd be 2 or 3 other couples and other kids around.
As I look back now at those Sundays at my grandfather and grandmother's house, I wish I had been much more aware of what we were doing back then. But I guess as kids, you're not.
You know, we talk over dinner. First of all, we make dinner. That's a big deal. And everybody gets in everybody else's way, and everybody knows the right way to do it. Nobody else's way is right. And so there's all this coming and going in the kitchen, lots of pots slamming things. Everything has to be turned into high drama. It all has to be an opera. Even the production of pasta has to be an opera. I mean, it really has to be operatic. Hopefully it's a comic opera and not a tragic opera, but you know, if we put too much salt in the sauce, we act almost as if people act at the end of Madame Butterfly.
I remember going to visit my father's mother. My grandmother didn't speak English, and in retrospect, I find it so touching. When I was a little girl, I was a little frightened because I couldn't quite understand her, and she would be so warm to me when we'd come to the door. You know, she would take me by my cheeks and shake me, and she meant it lovingly, but it was a little, scary. And she would always offer me milk and cookies and whatever she thought I would like.
I remember getting in trouble for something. I don't remember what it was anymore, but I had been spoken to sternly by my father, and my grandmother realized I was heartbroken, and she came and took me by the hand and walked me across her house from the living room all the way back to the cupboard in the dining room, and put her hand in her pocket and took out the little key. And of course the key meant the chocolate cupboard was going to be opened. You could feel your heart beginning to beat hard as she put the key in and opened the chocolate cupboard and took out a Suchard bar of chocolate, which you didn't have to share with anyone.
Mama always wanted the best for us. Whatever she made, she used only the finest ingredients, which were never very far away.
You know, I told my husband many years ago we can move anywhere, but I can never be more than 15 minutes away from a good piece of mozzarella. I mean, no matter where we live, there is the mozzarella factor.
When I first got married, my wife tried to wean me from coming down and getting all the cold cuts and the cheeses and this and that. She said, why don't you go to the supermarket? I said, you have to be kidding.
In great cities throughout America, we always relied on the specialty shops that pleased our palates and nourished our souls.
And it was an experience to walk through the mozzarella store and the prosciutto store and the pork store and the fruit store.
Purchasing the finest products at the lowest price brought out an old world talent.
You should see my grandma, small woman like this, negotiating the price of tomatoes. No, 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 no. 3,5, 3,5, 3,5, 3,5, 4. Va bene, 4 per 5. Fatto fare. Andiamo, su. Nicolino, hai visto come si fa?
When my mother and I went to the store, and I was the carrier sometimes of the mozzarella, the sausage, everything was fresh, it was wonderful. Then my mother would say, ma questa che la dai? Hey, whatever, dammi questo. No, questo è più meglio. I mean, this is better. Give me this one, you know. Saborito, you know, they cut a little piece of cheese. My mother would say, ah, okay, yeah.
Bene. Altro, mamma? Per il momento è lui.
Unlike French cooking, we don't grind it up until it's unrecognizable. We appreciate it for what it is, and we like it to be fresh and grown well. And many Italians like to grow their own foods.
And they were the first days that Americans heard of something like a zucchini buried away somewhere, or an artichoke, or broccoli. What was broccoli? What were these Italians eating? Garlic, my Lord in heaven.
I do not look at ingredients as ingredients like maybe tortellini or garlic or prezzemolo. I look at them as if they are notes in a symphony, and I can hear that sound. And as I put them together, they make this wonderful music. And I think this is something that all of us actually do have, the ability to see the music in food. And when it comes out together and it's perfect, it has a wonderful taste, a wonderful look. And when people let themselves go and they just go bada bing, bada boom, bada bam, a little bit of magic and a little passion, that's when it all comes together. And I think you don't have to be Italian, but it helps.
I don't want to trivialize the Italian-American experience by saying this, but I think that one of the first things that we're aware of is the food. I can remember every dish of pasta I've ever eaten. I can very clearly remember my grandmother's carrying into the living room in her queen's apartment a big platter full of rigatoni with just a few tomatoes on it. not a half a bucket of sauce the way you get it in restaurants. And it was so delicious.
You know, Italians, they don't care about food. I don't know where this mythology started. Of course, are you kidding? My Aunt Rose used to cook, like at Easter, they'd make this, this pie called the pizza rustica. This thing consisted of a quart of heavy cream, a dozen eggs, and salami. So they'd eat this thing on Good Friday. On Easter Sunday, they'd rise from the dead.
There was always food. And I'd take a little piece of bread and the sauce is cooking. You wouldn't dip it in. You didn't do it that way. You held it, you took the sauce and you put it on like a little pizza, and then, oh please, it was great. And if it dripped on your shirt, you'd have to take mozzarella and put a little piece of mozzarella on top of the sauce, because the mozzarella was white. So your shirt would go to church, and then in the middle of the mass, if you felt a little hungry, you could have a little piece of mozzarella while you're in church.
The most simple food of it all, bread soup. Bread soup was a soup that was made with bread that was left over from the day before, with just a couple of cans of peeled tomatoes, an onion, which everybody would have, some second-grade extra virgin olive oil, which is not extra virgin at that point, it's a basic olive oil, a little garlic, saute the onions, make the base, you add the tomatoes, the water that packs the tomatoes, maybe some extra water for some more flavor, and then as this beautiful sauce comes to a bubbling, boom, you add all this day-old, week-old, month-old bread. And then you look at it, the ingredients, all leftover stuff. But I will take that any day over the fanciest of all dishes.
We always demanded quality on our tables, but there was usually more quantity than visitors were prepared for.
I remember I had never seen so many courses of food as at a real Italian dinner, where the pasta was brought out and salad was brought out and antipasta was brought out.
And everybody's ready to get up, and now the roast beef and the chicken would come out. And people would be on the floor because they figured dinner was over, and you know, it was just getting to the main course.
Now, of course, you know, you want to die. Most of the men would just go, wake me up on the desserts, and they would lay on the couch. And you could do surgery on their brains. They were like out.
Well, you can't beat them. Well, look at him anyway. Make you feel more about it.
He's making stuffed lentique.
Yeah, but wait a minute. Oh, there she is. There's the real one. Salud. We love you. Salud. We love you. Get down, bro. Get down.
That's my favorite song, too, incidentally. Mama.
An Italian table without wine is like a Tuscan landscape without a grape arbor.
Wine was always part of good things at the table. Good bread with the right kind of good crust, excellent wine, different wines for different moments, sweet wines with desserts, champagne at celebrations. So wine was part of the sign that people cared about what you consumed at the table. And from the time we were very tiny, we were given a tablespoon of wine with water in it in a little liqueur glass. Everyone had stem glasses, and we had liqueur glasses, which had stems but were easier to manage, but they looked like wine glasses. So we had things in miniature, and it was all shared with us.
So much more was going on around that table than simply eating the best food in the world.
Part of the combination of the pleasure of having dinners was the people sitting long after dinner was over at the dinner table having discussions, and sometimes big arguments. And I probably became interested in politics that way because my family would argue about it all the time, sometimes changing positions just in order to continue the argument.
My father and I would have a discussion, and sometimes the discussions would become some, I don't want to say heated, but you know, they were lively. And a friend of my father's from the town, I walked out into looking at the backyard, I went out, get a little air, and he said to me, you know, Joe, you shouldn't talk to your father that way. I said, talk to my father what way? He said, well, you know, that was disrespectful. I said, what was? He said, that argument you had. I said, what argument? Go back inside. I said, Dad, Mr. Such and Such said we just had this argument. My father said, what argument? He said, that discussion we were having? He said, that's nothing.
Around our family table at night, if you could not express yourself and argue a point of view, whether on a family matter or the events of the day, you were going to lose the evening. And that put a value on the ability to command words and be expressive.
Everybody has their own style. You see, this is the Nick Stellino move. I will show you Vincenzo Stellino move. This is my father talking to me. This is a move that I never stole from him because I always felt this was more colorful. And then there is the Mario Stellino move, which is a move all of its own. You see, it's the shoulder roll. And it's amazing. It's like, no, non ci posso credere che questa sia una cosa che dobbiamo fare. My father answered back, ma com'è possibile? Scusa, non hai visto che cosa ti ho detto? And me jumping into the conversation. Ma siete tutti pazzi, siete? Veramente siete tutti pazzi? A me dovete ascoltare. You see these three people in the same family using this mannerism, which is basically a fingerprint-like definition of how they speak. And it's wonderful. Spend some time watching Italian talking. It's better than going to the movies.
And what Italians actually say to one another draws on a folk wisdom as old as the hills of Rome.
My father was very good. He'd say, "Più scuro della mezzanotte non può essere." In other words, he'd say, when we had trouble, he'd say, "Darker than midnight it cannot be."
My father used to say, if you walk with someone that limps, you're going to learn how to limp. In Italian, it's chi cammina col zoppo impara a zoppicare. So the example that the company you keep is very important.
My mother used to say, la gobba dell'altro, presto si vede, which means the other hunchback's hump is always easier to say.
There was this expression that is Sicilian, you know, they go, mizzica. Look at this, mizzica. And mizzica is like, oh mamma mia, what a wonderful thing. I cannot believe it means all of these things. But you see, mizzica, if I say it like this, mizzica, it means nothing, absolutely nothing. You look at this and you go, mizzica. But look at it again, mizzica.
The wonderful thing about being an Italian American or an Italian is you can be free, you can express yourself. That to love your children and hug them, and to love others and kiss a man on the cheek and hug him, this is a good thing. We started that. That never happened in America before the Italian Americans did that. We are connected to our roots. That's why we can be emotionally valuable. We are not afraid of getting expressive and playing the fool according to other people's version of us.
I think back in my own childhood, it was always noisy. Everyone talked at once. My Uncle John was always poking me with his elbow. It was just, it was chaotic. And, but I think that you know, Barzini says that Italians actively foment chaos. And within that chaos, there is an order, and you have to figure out what it is.
In the midst of this wonderful chaos was a serenity, a quiet knowledge that gave us great confidence. Our glorious old Italian culture would sustain us always.
Ave, Ave, Ave Maria. Ave, Ave Maria.
We returned from the Second World War to a rapidly changing America. The land of opportunity offered us more possibilities than we could have imagined. The ability to work hard had won us a foothold here, and that virtue we would never lose. But moving up in American society meant taking advantage of every opportunity.
At a moment in time, the war was ending, and I suppose it didn't take a genius to realize that after 5 years or so of immigrant Italians not seeing their mothers, their fathers, their sisters, their brothers in Italy, that there would be a stampede to get to Italy. When my father opened his business, he immediately came up with a slogan that in Italian is kind of pretty. It's Chi viaggia con Perillo, viaggia tranquillo. If you travel with Perillo, you'll travel tranquilly.
I got a job as an office boy at a Humble Oil Company, whose like doesn't exist anymore. The Humble Oil Company's founders loved their employees to go to school at night. And I went to the University of Houston at night, 6:30 to 9:30 every night. That when I finally graduated from the University of Houston, after the war in 1946, I decided to go to Harvard Business School to be interviewed. I'll never forget it. And the guy says to me, University of Houston, he said, we've never heard of that. Well, I said, put it this way. I graduated from the youngest university in the country. Now I want to go to the oldest university in the country. What's wrong with that?
My father was in the office, my Uncle Nick was in the shop, my Uncle Joe and my Uncle Tom basically ran the wholesale and the retail. After the war, the complexion changed and they opened up many outlets. Then we went through some very tough times, you know. And the supermarkets and all the little grocery stores closed up and their normal channels for these products kind of disappeared and everybody wanted Wonder Bread or something. And, you know, it was tough. It was really tough. I remember, you know, my father, they were ready to close. You know, they had invested their whole life in this thing, and they pulled it out. They pulled it out 7 days a week, 5 loaves of bread for $1. I don't know what else. You know, they never gave up.
Success and recognition started to come in a great many fields. No great surprise to us. After all, wasn't the Renaissance the most creative period in European history? Born in Italy.
My father, being a man who was interested in the way things worked and the way things happened, was always pointing out to me, you know, Leonardo da Vinci, would you believe Leonardo da Vinci all those years ago discovered this or discovered that? I remember him being very enchanted by what Leonardo da Vinci knew.
I take delight in the fact that I am descended in some way from Michelangelo and from Raphael and from Da Vinci and even from Machiavelli. He's a great writer. You may not agree with everything he wrote.
I always say my intellectual life really began when I entered graduate school. I feel very rich as an Italian American in terms of my legacy. It has shaped my spirit as an educator and as a writer. My love for Dante, for example, is a very deep one.
I was taking Dante, the Inferno, first semester, and after we fell in love, David audited that class, so we had this fabulous love story and a piece of literature to share. And second semester, he signed up to actually take the Purgatorio, and that summer we took Paradiso together. So I always think we really started in Italian together.
That's true. I entered in purgatory. That's a good way to put it.
What this country doesn't know, what the United States of America's population doesn't know about Italy, is that in the fields of science and art and music, Italy has been preeminent.
Who was the greatest violinist? Paganini. Who was the greatest political theorist? Machiavelli. Who was the greatest developer of innovations in the teaching of children? Montessori. So the stories went on. As little children, you thought, well, these are my people.
In this country, we were developing our own Italian-American heroes to inspire us. A.P. Giannini, the founder of San Francisco's Bank of Italy, was scorned by the city's banking elite for being undignified. After the earthquake and fire of 1906, Giannini's bank was one of the few to make loans to the city's working men, often using as a basis for trust the calluses on a man's hand. By bringing financial services to what he called the little fellow, Giannini, more than anyone else, helped rebuild San Francisco, and his tiny Bank of Italy became the powerful Bank of America.
I guess Mother Cabrini has always been a heroine for me. She was an Italian woman who arrived on the shores of this country with the assignment to start schools for Italians and Italian Americans in New York City. And with no money and no friends, she started the Catholic schools in New York. and the Catholic hospitals, of course, Cabrini Hospital, both in New York and then in Chicago.
For her efforts on behalf of the poor, Mother Francesca Cabrini was canonized, the first American saint. And if sainthood were bestowed for dispensing joy, Jimmy Durante would certainly have been the second.
I remember being taken backstage at a nightclub once by my father to meet Jimmy Durante. I think it was the Copacabana in New York. And I had just seen Durante on stage give this apparently improvised performance. I mean, he didn't do jokes. He just sort of lived. It lifted your spirits because he was so alive.
Hey, remember that brave the eagle who fought me out with nothing but a flying suit on the head.
I remember that sight of him and how clearly hard he had worked at being free and happy and improvisational. And I knew I wanted to be like that.
I wanted to be an actor from the time I was 4, but I developed a singing voice at the time I was 8 or 9, and that was the heyday of Mario Lanza. And I started listening to Lanza, and I knew that I had that kind of voice. And so that dream was in me. The tandem dream of being an actor and a singer was always with me.
The inspiration for young boys all over America was an athlete of exceptional grace.
I remember Joe DiMaggio as a young fan. My Joe DiMaggio closeness now is knowing him now, and knowing that we're good friends, and I admire everything he's accomplished.
He was the superstar, and he did everything in such a graceful manner, and he was very quiet and very reserved, and where so many other players were so flashy. So he was my idol.
People had their favorite crooners, but in their hearts, they knew there was really only one.
Until I hear you at the door, until you're in my arms once more. Saturday night is the loneliest night of the week.
Fly me to the moon and let me play among the stars. Let me see what spring is like on Jupiter and Mars. In other words, hold my hand. In other words, darling, kiss me. I feel more vulnerable and more mortal at this point because he's gone. I grew up to that. I mean, I heard that as a little boy in the 40s. I used to hear his voice on what they called the Battle of the Baritones. He molded my life without my even knowing it or him.
Frank was a good friend of mine. I worked with him on the Dean Martin show. And I asked him one time, what did your father think of your singing? And he said, my father said, get a regular job already. What are you doing? What is this with the singing? Get a job. So he said he was at the Paramount. And he said to his father, come from Jersey and see me at work. Now, when he was at the Paramount, he'd sing night and day. And the girls, rah! You are the one. Rah! Rah! They'd scream and yell. Thousands of girls would scream and yell. So his father came backstage after he saw the show, and Frank said, well, what did you think? And his father said, I couldn't hear a goddamn thing.
He was always being played in our home and on the car radio, and I have to say I always loved Frank Sinatra. Even a lot of my friends were listening to rock and roll. I loved Frank Sinatra and Tony Bennett.
To me, if I'm switching the TV dial, and if I come upon Ocean's 11 or any one of those movies, it's stop. I don't care where it is in the movie. I'm going to watch the rest.
A guy can't do it by himself.
Oh, hell.
You know what you're letting yourself in for. It ain't pretty. And it could be dangerous.
If they find you here, then they find you, is all.
I don't mean dangerous from Bednar. I mean dangerous from me.
Frank Sinatra had a fierce pride in being Italian, but he had even a more fierce pride, double that, in being an American. That really meant a lot to him, to be an American. His parents were immigrants, you know, and he was first generation, and it meant an awful lot to him to be an American. He was so proud.
What is America to me? A house I live in, a plot of earth, a street, a grocer and a butcher, and the people that I meet.
And toward the end, when he knew that he didn't have much long to go, when he'd sing that song, they would turn all the lights on in the arena. He'd say, but especially the people. That's America to me. When he would get to that part toward the end, tears would run down his eyes.
But especially the people. That's America to me. So long, men.
Because Sinatra and other exceptional Italian Americans showed us the way, we knew success was possible. But it would take courage, a little luck, and tremendous effort.
I went into the Army very early, spent 3 years of my life there, floundering around, not knowing quite what to do. I met my wife very, very early. We got married in our teens, and before you know it, I had 4 kids. I became a successful union president for the Greyhound Bus Union in New York. I was there for 10 years, lost the job as a result of a wildcat strike. I had nowhere else to go, and for some reason, someone pointed me to the Improvisation, a theatrical hangout on West 44th Street, Bud Friedman, proprietor. He gave me a job there. He recognized my talent, and he gave me the opportunity of becoming a bouncer. And before you know it, I began auditioning for jobs, and I went. I said, hey, I can do this, and I did it.
I thought my career was over. I was going to look for something else to do after I was fired from St. Louis in '95. And all of a sudden this door opened up, and it's been the greatest time of my entire life since I came back to New York. And realizing that the greatest thing that ever happened to me in my profession was when I was 56 years old. I think that's something to tell people, that chase your dream and never give up on it, because it's out there somewhere.
That was my Oscar. That was better than any Oscar I would ever get. That was to watch my beautiful little girl, Mira, who was this little beautiful child, and grow up to be this incredible, accomplished, wonderful person that she is, never mind her talent, which I believe to be prodigious. Her work ethic, which is phenomenal, just like all of us who come from that. And to be so stunned that she should turn around and thank me at a time like that, that was too much. That I couldn't take. I can take a lot, but I couldn't take that.
Our determination and creativity brought us hard-won recognition and reward, and enriched America in the process. We Italian Americans had earned the right to be proud.
The Honorable Jack Valente and Mrs. Valente.
From our highest courts to our finest tables, from our playing fields to our silver screen, from one side of the aisle in Congress to the other, Italian Americans have graced our nation with their intellect, their industry, their goodwill, and above all, a contagious love of life.
You do realize we are on the shoulders of giants. There's absolutely no question. My father, at the age of 11, went to work in the coal mines, the hard coal mines of Pennsylvania. I think one of the proudest moments of my life was a year or two ago when my son, who was then 15, was asked to write a story about someone who had influenced him. And he wrote about my father. And he had never met my father. My father died before he was born, but he knew the story of my father.
And so we must tell the children. Tell them the stories of the land we left behind. Tell them what we have had to endure and how we have overcome and triumphed. We must tell them so they can really know who they are.
If you would like a VHS copy of this program, call 1-800-847-7793. Funding for this program is provided by Bertolli Olive Oil, born in Tuscany and used by generations. If you want it to be better, it better be Bertolli. And by Sorrento Cheese Company. For over half a century, Sorrento Cheese Company has followed the secrets of its old world recipe to produce ricotta, mozzarella, provolone, and other traditional Italian cheese. Sorrento cheese, the authentic taste of Italian tradition.
My mother was a lovely lady. She was a cook. If you wake my mother up 3 o'clock in the morning, she'll make pasta fazool for you. You know what pasta fazool is? Beans and macaroni. Now, I have to warn you about this. You cannot eat any more than one bowl of pasta fazool because you could ruin the wallpaper. Pasta fazool is dangerous. You can't leave pasta fazool alone with children. They'll blow themselves right out the window. Where's Johnny? He just left. Pasta fazool is very important, and here's the recipe. First, you take a lot of garlic and you put it in some oil. Then you get a little pasta and bring it to the boil. Fresh tomatoes, salt and pepper, and basil just a teeny. And then the main ingredient, the cannellini beanie. Stir it nice, stir it gentle, and put it in a bowl. And then you add the Parmesan that's so good for your soul. There are some, when they eat it, they break into a dance. Most Italians, when they eat it, they go into a trance. If you like it and you eat it and you are a dancing fool, then you're eating and you're dancing the pasta fazool. First, you take a lot of garlic, you put it in some oil, then you get a little pasta and bring it to the boil. Salt and pepper, fresh tomatoes, and basil just a teeny, and then the main ingredient, the cannellini beanie. Stir it nice, stir it gentle, and put it in a bowl, and then you add the Parmesan that's so good for your soul. There are some, when they eat it, they go into a trance. Most Italians, when they do it, they break into a dance. If you like it and you eat it, and you are a dancing fool, then you're eating and you're dancing the pasta fazool. Bon appetit!
You might not believe this, even though I'm dressed as a chef, but I used to be a stockbroker. So when I quit my career in the financial field and I started washing dishes the next week, trying to work my way up to the restaurant, my father thought I was basically crazy. And it was not until a few years ago when he finally saw me on TV and he saw all the things that I've done. I remember one time going shopping at the market in Sicily, Vucceria in Palermo, one of the oldest market there is. And I was looking for fish and I was checking things out. And this gentleman was being kind of snotty at me, the man selling the fish. And my father looks at him and he says, "Hey, don't talk to my son like this. He's a big chef in America, big chef, And that was the first time, in a very soft yet hardened way, that I realized how proud my father was of what I did.
My mother ran the shop, but my father had his little secrets. I remember before my father died, he took me into the cellar, and he said, "Put your hand up behind this wood." And I did. And I said, "Do you feel anything?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "What do you feel?" I said, "Leather." I said, "Something in there. It feels like a wallet." He said, "It's a wallet." So he said, "Don't look at it." I said, "What do you want me to do?" He said, "When I die," I looked at him. He said, "When I die, you come down." I said, "Okay." "And what do you want me to do?" He said, "Take that wallet out, and there's some money there. And every now and then I want you to buy something for your mother." My father died. I went down. There was a couple of $1,000, which, believe me, on my father's salary, he had saved over 20 years. I don't know how he did it. I took the money, I gave it to my sister because I was living away, and every now and then I would just buy something. Just sort of a little bit of a surprise. My father, I think in his own way, wanted to be taking care of his family even after he was dead.
I remember one time when Danny DeVito was being honored, and there were 3,000 Italians, and President Clinton was coming, and Mrs. Clinton. And they said, "Dom, can you start the proceedings with a chuckle?" So I happen to have my camera with me. I take it all the time to the White House. I just pull out my little, camera. So I said, "It's wonderful to be here with Mrs. Clinton, President Clinton. It's such an auspicious occasion. I hope that you don't mind, but I want to remember this moment forever. Danny DeVito is being honored. Mr. President, would you be good enough to come up here?" So the president came up, and I handed him my camera, and I said, "Danny," and Danny DeVito stood up, and President Clinton took about 4 pictures with me and Danny DeVito. They screamed with laughter. They just really, and he was very sweet. President Clinton said, "You want me to take the picture?" And I said, "Yes, please," under my breath, "Yes, please." So at the end of it, President Clinton said, "I came here, I thought I was going to be honored. I didn't realize it was going to turn out to be Dom DeLuise's photographer." Now, in my neighborhood, you could walk down the block, 66th Street in Brooklyn, Regina Pacis. Everybody was Italian. Here's the names I grew up with: Anita Caleo, Dominic Bimbo, Cosmo Infantolino, John Scunziano, Tootsie Utroli. These were just the Jews.
When we met, Claire was living in a rooming house in Bloomington, Indiana, and she had taken a single room on the upper floor of a large 3-story house, and her landlady was Eunice. And I remember that naturally Claire invited me over for dinner one of the times when we had first met, and had gone on an expedition to do the salad, which naturally called for oil and vinegar to dress the salad. Well, this was 1966 in southern Indiana, and as we came to discover, the only place that olive oil was available was in the local pharmacy, where it was prescribed as an emetic. In addition to that, red wine vinegar was not obtainable in Bloomington, Indiana at all. Claire had to make a trip all the way to Indianapolis to obtain a bottle of red wine vinegar. So we had a wonderful dinner together, and it was, in fact, I think for me, the first introduction to oil and vinegar on a salad dressing. But a couple of days later, Claire called in tears and said, "My God, I've had just the most terrible, terrible altercation with Eunice, the landlady. She came to my room, knocked on the door early in the morning and said I was going to have to leave." And I said, "What on earth has gone on? What have you done?" And she said, "Well, I haven't done anything, but Eunice had the bottle of red wine vinegar in her hand, and she was shaking it at me. And she said, when you came in here, I told you you could absolutely not have alcoholic beverages in here. And here you've got this bottle of wine in my kitchen, and you're just going to have to get out." And Claire said, I tried to reason with her. I tried to explain what it was and that it went on the salad and so on. And in fact, I even took the cap off the bottle and I tried to get her to taste it. So, but she wouldn't have any of it. So, so I really am going to have to look for another place to live because this isn't going to work in the long run. And indeed, that's what happened. Sure enough, after that episode, in fact, you did leave
Right.
Eunice's house and went to another set of adventures with another set of classmates.
That's right. That's right. In fact,
Italy was a long way from southern Indiana in 1966.
In fact, Eunice made me pour the red wine vinegar in the sewer down the street. She wouldn't let me throw it out on her property because she was convinced that it was the liquid of the devil.
I was stopped for speeding in Italy. And you have to be going pretty fast to be stopped for speeding in Italy, you know. And the cop came over, and he started to joke with me about how fast I was going. What's the matter? And he started to do it with his whole body. His whole body was funny. There's not many places where the cops do physical humor. And this guy, like most Italians, took pleasure in that moment. He's got to live through that moment anyway. He might as well have some fun with it.
My mother ended up marrying a man by the name of Sam Lanovsky, Jewish man. And when my mother got sick, it was very funny. Well, not funny that she was sick, but she got well from this. But she was in a hospital, in Einstein Hospital in the Bronx, and a rabbi came by and looked at the door and said, Francis Lanovsky, to check. So my wife was Jewish, said, why didn't you tell him that you're, yes? I said, no, I'm not going to tell him. So he put a little something on it. It was Jewish, a Jewish star. Then a priest came in with Lanovsky, Aiello, and he put a little cross there. So when I went in the hospital, she had a Jewish star. She had everything. I think there was Greek Orthodox. Mom said, I'm not taking any chances.
Olive oil is wonderful because if you just use it for food, that's one thing. But if you don't, you use it for other things, you're really taking advantage of it. If you have an earache, you heat it up, Q-tip, a little warm up your ear. Your hair is funny, you just put some olive oil, then shampoo it, boom, like that. I use it on the inside of my thighs. I lubricate the inside of my thighs because sometimes I run in the morning and it prevents my pants from catching on fire. But olive oil is a wonderful thing. You can use it for anything, anything.
The man who I'm named after, and my favorite story about Stefano Florio, he had this wonderful workshop. He had converted a two-car garage, and it was spotless. Every tool was oiled. They were hung on a board, not just a makeshift board with nails sticking out of it, but beautiful wooden pegs. The workbench itself was a big, thick piece of wood that was kind of gnarled and beat up from all of the cabinets and headboards and variety of things that he would make. These things, I used to say, of lasting, but things that'll outlast me. He used to talk about that all the time. At one of these dinners, at one of these Sunday dinners, he said to me, why don't you, I was there alone. For some reason, my cousins couldn't go, and my little brothers were just too little to play with at that point. I was about 12 or 13, I guess. And he said, why don't you go out to the workshop and why don't you make something? Well, to have free access to a workshop like that. And he gave me some wood, and I kind of made a toy boat. Boats are something that I've always loved, being on the water, even as a kid. And he came back a little bit while later, and he said, I think you should clean the entire workshop now. And he had been working in there all week long, and he hadn't had a chance to clean it up, and there was sawdust, and tools were laying about. And I worked on that for probably 2.5 hours. And I wiped down every tool, and I put it back in the special place that he had made for it. I put oil on the workbench because I had seen him do that. I swept the floor. I covered those machines that had covers. I mean, it was, I stacked up the wood, the spare wood, did it because he said to me, this is where the oak goes, this is where the maple goes, this is where the cedar goes. I remember stacking this all up, and it was perfect. And he came out 2 hours later, and he gave me a big hug, and he said to me, Stephen, this is beautiful. This workshop never looked so good. He said, I'm going to give you a reward. And he handed me a 1936 quarter. And I thought, I worked 2 hours cleaning this place up. He hands me a quarter, not even enough to go buy ice cream. He said, if you had made something, and he saw the look on my face, he was a very smart guy. He said, you know, if you had made something in this shop that other people had made, a bed or a chair or a headboard or a carving for a fireplace, you would have made a lot more money than that because you would have had a craft. If you had come up with an idea and you had made something in this shop that no one else had ever made before, and then you could have the dream and then put it down on paper and then make it. Really make something happen that had never happened before. Truly create something of lasting value that people would look at and see the intelligence of, then that would be priceless. But for you to just clean up, it's only worth a quarter, because anybody could clean up. He said, don't ever, ever spend that quarter. It will remind you of the value of craft for the rest of your life.
As I came to America, I eventually I had an opportunity to either stay and continue my college education, which my father gave me permission for. And I stayed here and I finished college. I graduated from Arizona State, as a matter of fact. Once I graduated, I took a year to take a job here, which was allowed at the time, before I was supposed to go back. During that process, I met my wife and I fell in love. People say, what does it mean you fell in love? There's the one moment which is unequivocal in your whole life, in which you meet someone, and it is so right, it is so perfect. All the pieces come together, and I knew that was the right thing. And I talked to my dad, and I said, Dad, I know that I promised you I would come back home to run the family business with you, but I found something here that I don't think I will find for the rest of my life, and my place is here. And it's at that moment that I think I became a true American, when I made the commitment to stay here. And since then, I always tell everybody that was the best decision I've ever made in my life. In my life, I think I failed more than I succeeded. I can say that with 100% guaranteed. But there's always that one right decision that I made a long time ago, almost 15 years ago, that forever will shine as that one thing that defines the very best that is about me. And the very best I found it in America. So, going back to my father, Nicolino, l'America è un sogno. America is a dream. He was right. I found my dream in America, and I even married it.
T'incita in cella sta compagna vostra, che ha già perduto su una fantasia, che pensa sempre per tutta vita mia, e già volesse dicere, ma io non saccio di. That's just the beginning of a song about a man who cannot say, I love you, to a lady. And all these Neapolitan songs are filled with passion, and so he says, instead of saying, I love you, he says, go tell your friend that I love her. And then in the second verse, he says, it's not her, it's you that I love. Well, they love that song because it's all filled with mixed emotions, and it's filled with all the feelings that we felt, about not being exactly clear with a beautiful girl that you want to say, I love you. Everybody gets very awkward, when if you say, that's the girl for me, and then you say, you can't talk.
My grandmother, my mother's mother, became desperately sick with pneumonia one terrible winter in New York. She had 4 children at the time and went into a very serious collapse. And they actually brought the children in. This was before antibiotics, and they brought the children in one after another to say goodbye to their mother. She had been given the last rites. And my grandfather, of course, who was the doctor, understood how desperately ill she was and brought in his best friend, Dr. Gaudiani, who was the surgeon, to see her. And Gaudiani said, there's nothing to be done. There's an experimental operation that we could try. It would involve actually opening her chest and relieving the infection. But we don't know, because these haven't been done very often. And my grandfather and grandmother talked together about whether or not it would be good to try this, or whether they shouldn't. And they decided to do the following. They said that if she were healed, they would go back to Italy, as they did many summers, and they would bring the diamond earrings that he had given her on their 10th anniversary. And they would bring those diamond earrings to the statue of the Blessed Mother, the Santa Maria delle Grazie, and offer them as a gift of thanksgiving. And they would pray for that gift, for her to be healed. On the other hand, with all that praying and with all of the gift promised, they would go ahead with the experimental operation. And she was too sick to be moved, so they draped her bedroom. And Dr. Gaudiani came into the operation himself in her bedroom with her husband in attendance, and they saved her life. And they went back 2 summers following to bring the diamonds. And it was on that trip that they conceived my mother. And the answer to the prayer was not only to give up the diamonds, but while there to receive this incredible blessing of a new baby. And poetically enough, this child, my mother, grew up to marry Dr. Gaudiani's only son and to create the 6 of us who carry on Gaudiani's name. And the culture in both families, so rich and intertwined with both the spirituality and the pragmatism that are really part of Italian-American culture.
They were doing a magazine story I'm in one time, and the woman said to me, well, who do you hang out with on the West Coast? And I said, well, I sort of hang out with neighborhood guys, because I'm a neighborhood guy. I'm kind of a street guy. You know, and she said, I said, well, like on Monday Night Football at my house, you know, we'd make some, there might be, Frankie Avalon comes over and he makes Philadelphia steak sandwiches, and I said, my buddy Eddie Marinero comes over, and I said, Dennis Farina comes over, and sometimes Joe Pesci comes over, and, you know, and I start naming these guys, and I said, Craig Martin, Dean Martin's son, comes over, and Linda Mancuso from Chicago, who works at NBC, comes over, and I start naming just the people, and finally, the person doing the story said, have you noticed that you've only named Italians? I said, gee, I didn't think about that. You know, Joe Mantegna and all these guys are my friends. I didn't think about that. And I said, yeah, and you know, what I realized was I gravitated to them because I felt like they were family. When I left my family in Illinois, my friends and family, these folks brought that La Familia, the family, to me, you know.
Carnival time in Viareggio. And, as in years past, a year of dedicated labor by the town's madcap mummers produces a grand, garish, gargantuan, and gala spectacle without compare. They even stage their own summit meeting with 4 very distinctive angels of peace. Light-hearted lampooning, a bit of sly satire to spice the mirth and revelry that has all Viareggio in a whirl throughout the pre-Lenten festival. Singer-composer Domenico Volare Modugno presides over the parade, following a tradition many generations old. Every year sees a dazzling panorama, poking good-humored fun at topical fancies, foibles, and follies. No one is really safe, but everyone finds delight in Viareggio's carnival merrymaking.
Now, I would walk down the middle of the street about 11 o'clock on Sunday morning, and I'm not saying that I was near houses, right down the middle of the street, and I could smell garlic the whole way down cooking, because every single house was making garlic and sausages and meatballs, and the smell would go in the street and mix with the air, so you didn't even know that you were not breathing pure air. You didn't know that you were breathing garlic and olive oil, and that's what I thought air smelled like. I thought air smelled like garlic and oil. It was great, you know, it was great.
Well, some of my earliest memories are of going to my grandmother's house for dinner on a Sunday. And she always set a spectacular table with a white linen cloth that looked like altar linen, and all the beautiful things on the table with these cut glass and silver containers and spoons and things that were just magical for a little kid. And I was passionate about grated Parmesan cheese. And there in the middle of the table was this beautiful cheese container with a silver top and a spoon in it, full of fluffy grated cheese. And when I got old enough to reach, I couldn't go by it without moving the little container close to the edge of the table, quietly opening the little silver top and snagging several tablespoons of cheese. The problem with doing this, though, which I had great guilt complexes about, was not only were you ruining your appetite and taking what didn't belong to you, which were relatively serious right there. I'm not sure which one was more serious, ruining your appetite or taking what didn't belong to you. But the third was a really serious moral problem, and that was using the spoon that everyone was going to spoon and putting your germs on the spoon. And I was very conscious of the fact that this was the wrong thing. And I remember as a little kid not having any alternatives. There was no way to get another spoon because my grandmother's buffet drawers were quite heavy and I couldn't get them open without making noise. And the dining room was right off the living room, which was where everyone was talking. And of course no one should discover that I was taking cheese. So there was really only one sensible spoon, which was the little silver spoon that was in the cheese container. And over time, I developed a technique which enabled me to still ruin my appetite and also take what didn't belong to me, but not to leave germs. I learned how to take a full spoonful, push my head back, and then just do a dumpster right into my mouth, so I didn't have to actually get any of my germs on the spoon. And that was my sort of Thomistic philosophy resolution to the germ problem. And I must have been 8 when I figured this out, and was very happy for a number more years until I got over, gave up cheese stealing.
Now that's Italian.